Scripture reading this evening will be from Proverbs 12:1. It's Proverbs 12, verse 1. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid.
I'm going to spend the whole time in Luke chapter 15. So if you would like to turn there, Luke 15, I'll be focusing on the prodigal son. So it'll be verses 11 through 24 that I'll spend my time on. I did want to go through and read it together, and we'll go back and go over it specifically. So this is Luke 15, starting in verse 11. Then he said, "A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that fall to me.' So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare? And I perish with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to be merry." I wanted to go verse by verse. This is kind of, I'm sure we've all heard a lot of sermons on this topic. I've heard a lot of sermons on this topic. You'll get, kind of hodgepodge of things that I've learned, and then things that I've specifically noticed. But I wanted to spend some time in this text. So verse 12, reading this, it becomes pretty clear that he's not just asking for half. He's actually, the concept here would be much more like he had told his dad, I wish you were dead. I'm tired of waiting for you to die, and now is the time for my half of the money. So not only is it asking for money, it's asking for money wrapped in an insult. It's something to consider. He goes into 13. So, of course, he receives the money. He gathers it all together, far country. There he lives it up. It's the feast, right? He's got his money. He is living high on the hog. Well, I guess I shouldn't say high on the hog. But he's living it up. This is a Jew we're talking about. I guess he doesn't live high on the hog. But he living it up, right? He's having a feast. But it becomes real clear that it's only one verse later that the feast turns to famine. It's not like it just comes down a little bit and it goes into maintenance and just things are just okay. No, it goes from feast to famine, and I think if you have much wisdom in you at all, it's a pretty apparent pattern to the life of a person who lives at that feast sinfully. It is followed by a time of famine. Spiritually, it's always, that's what's left, is famine after a sinful feast. He goes, and sadly, it's one of those deals also that lasts a lot longer than the feast ever did. That's something to remember. 15, he goes to work for a Gentile, which is kind of crazy because this is something he wouldn't want his friends at home to see, right? Good or bad times, you wouldn't want to go to work for a Gentile. And then to boot, the work he's doing, he's taking care of swine, just as we mentioned the high and the hog. This is not a good work for a Jew. 16, he's so hungry. And I myself, even as I was getting ready for this lesson, he had the pods, he was eating the pods. No, he wished he was eating the pods. I mean, this was famine. Don't lose track of the famine he's in the midst of. The pig food looked delicious, but he got none. All right, so then you go to 17. He comes to himself. He doesn't come to himself in the midst of that feast, that party. That is not when he comes to himself. When does he come to himself? He comes to himself in the famine. Oh, there's a lot of clear thinking that gets done in a famine. For my life, your life, you've seen it. If you hadn't yet, it will be something that happens to you. A lot of extremely clear thinking happens in a famine that doesn't happen during the party. When he comes to himself, I guess give him some credit, right? He does come to himself. And in that coming to himself, it is a blow to his pride. It's a realization, right? I mean, it's painful, that clarity. But he could have chosen to go just on with it. So we do need to give him some credit, and the credit builds, right? But often, myself included, I have been one to make fun of this guy. This guy, fool, poor fool. Until the day, just like David, it becomes, you are the man. It is you. You are the one starving by your own choices, left in a famine. All right, so then verses 18, 19, he comes up with a plan, right? He's going to apologize and then ask for a job, and everything's going to be totally fine. No more problems. So he starts back. That's verse 20. He rises to go to his father. This verse 20, I'm sure to others as well, this is one that just is really the one with the hooks to my heart, is that this father runs to come get him. We talked about this a long time ago when I was doing a Sunday morning class about, no, the alpha male in this society did not run. Just like today, if you're rich enough, you don't run to the plane waits for you if you're a big enough guy. And if it goes, you get another plane with the snap of your finger. So this is a wealthy man. This is a society where really only children, really, and slaves were easily allowed to run around. If you had propriety, you would slowly do your walk. And so to run is astonishing, right? This is a day when people watched who was walking around a lot more than today. Everybody's got their eyes on a television. Not long ago here, you would have seen people, you would have known who was up and down the street. So back then you sure knew who was up and down your road. And so those people would have seen two astonishing things, right? The first was the prodigal son shamefully walking home and returning. But the other thing that these people would have seen would have been a father running, taking shame on himself, and really taking it from the son. The attention shifted to the father in a lot of ways, right? That he took some of that shame from that son on himself so that his son could return and be restored. It's astonishing. He accepted and just took that on himself. The prodigal's response, 21. He says, now remember his first plan. All he says this time, because he saw the running. He knew what the running meant. He, this time, didn't ask for the job. He had planned to apologize, ask for a job. Everything was going to be okay. So what does he do this time? He sees what just happened, the shame that his father took on, and so all he does is apologize. Really, he realizes, in my mind, that for him to have asked for a job would have been one more step of pride, because he would have expected to get it, right? To ask, you're going to expect to get it. And so he has another moment of clarity, and that is that was not for him to ask. All he could do was apologize and then and just stand before his father, not worthy, really. He wasn't in the position to ask for a job. That would have just been more pride and really an insult to what had just happened with his father running to him. So he stands there, broken before this father who loves him. And so the question to you, to me, is that you today? Has it been you? Will it be you? Hopefully you're not so prideful to think that this couldn't happen to you. Really, none of us are far from starving in a land wishing for pig food. I mean, you're a couple of decisions away from huge amounts of pain for you and your family, and to find yourself sitting there starving. You would be longing for pods just destroyed. So we have to keep that in mind. That don't be like I mentioned, where you laughing at this prodigal. So because it's not if the day will come where you're in that position, it is when. All right, you can be restored when that happens. God is big enough to take that shame, and that shame really needs to be in your mind between you and your Father, and not others shouldn't really come into it necessarily with the shame. The Father has run to you, is willing to run to you to take that shame himself. Verse 22, the Father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. 23, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. That Father prepared a feast. That was a feast that was so fantastic, it wiped out the famine that boy had come out of, right? It wasn't sort of enough. It wasn't like, well, I'm still a little hungry afterwards. No. Wiped it out. That was a feast to be had. I had, when I was getting ready for this lesson, I kind of had a whole other track for where I was going with this. And I shifted, and I'm going to explain what happened, because I think it was useful. It was good to me as I got the lesson ready. I myself, when I was getting ready, I was like, oh, I should come up with something kind of funny around the pods, like, stay out of the pods, or I don't know, some kind of something to kind of make it a little easier, maybe, of something to go into a lesson. And I had a moment of clarity, and that my clarity was that don't get distracted by the pods. The clarity, the important thing in this story is that the son had his own clarity. I don't care if it was pods or something else. The pods didn't matter. It was the clarity that really became important. And so I call each of us to that clarity. That clarity is a lifestyle. Really, for him to have only had one event of clarity wouldn't have been enough. He needed clarity to then stack upon clarity to stack upon clarity, right? His first clarity was that, whoa, I'm starving. This is no fun. Second clarity is really where he gets to his father and realizes his father wanted him back, shamed himself to get him back. And that really his position was so desperate that he had no right to even really though stand there. So that was his second clarity. And then his next clarity is that his father would restore him, right? It became clear that things are happening. I'm getting a robe and food. Clarity. And those clarities led to his return to sonship, his not starving anymore, right? That lifestyle of clarity, I believe, will force you to return. Your heart needs to be involved, certainly, but just being willing to be clear and then not surrender to the clarity. When it becomes clear to you that you are starving, that you don't try to forget that you're starving, that you actually then start working at how to get full. You can return. It's pretty easy if you're not. So for Christians, right, the lesson here is that you can return. No matter what you've done, young, old, you can return. He will run to come to you and to return you to your place. If you're not a Christian, it's pretty easy to dismiss this whole thing, right? Pretty easy. Like, I don't have a horse in this race. I'm not an older son or younger son or anybody. I have a son who will remain unnamed, and one of his things that he thinks is hilarious is if one of his other brothers has their shirt on backwards. Like, that's like the funniest thing. Like, that's so funny. And The funniest though is when he's just like, look everybody, they've got their shirt on backwards, and he has his shirt is on backwards, and he's calling out one of his brothers to say that, and like making a big hubbub, big deal about it. All right, if you're not a Christian, it's not that you're not involved in the story. You're starving in a starving land. It may just not be clear to you yet, right? And the prodigal son, it's not that you're not in the story. You are sitting next to the prodigal son, and all of a sudden he stands up and takes off, and you're sitting there, where are you going? Like, that is where you are. It's not that you're not involved in the story. It's that you are just as in the story as he is, but yet you are sitting in a starving land. Your shirt is on backwards, right? You maybe just haven't had the moment of clarity to see it, and then so that you can start doing something about it. It is time for your clarity now. It's your chance. It's the clarity that will save your soul, and that clarity needs to make sure that you see that old life that is in your possession but is worth nothing, and then how much you have to gain by surrendering that and turning yourself towards a Father who will make you a son. You don't have to have that deep internal starving. That Father ran to the Son in love, and maybe tonight will be the first time that he runs to you if you will turn yourself to him. Have that clarity. You can be his child. He is a Father worth having. Tonight is an opportunity to do that. If you are among those who aren't baptized, tonight is a good time. You can turn your life over to him, be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, and become a son. And the spiritual starvation can be over. But tonight is the time to do that while we stand and sing.